Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto leaves the village to help Kurama and Yugito forms a harem with Samui and Karui, part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this and comment for next part. And now let's start the fanfic. The previous day had a dark origin for the entire village of Konohagakure no Sato. But more so for a certain 7-year-old blonde child. Yesterday was the day of his birth and he absolutely dreaded the gifts he receives from the villagers. This year was the third time. After the first encounter he woke up in a ditch filled with dirt and trash, mixed with his own blood. Last year, he woke up in a hospital bed with IVs in his arm. At first he was rather glad of the outcome, until he noticed that it was water entering his bloodstream, instead of medicine. If you ask him personally, of the two, he appreciated the first. Because at least he knew exactly who his enemies were and who his friends weren't. Since this was the third time, this got him wondering just what he would wake up to. The problem was he wasn't waking at all. Before he panicked he realized that he was neither conscious nor unconscious, but in between. There was one more thing of note. Water, and a lot of it. It was surrounding him entirely. When he realized he was submerged in the liquid he jolted upright and out of the water. He went into a coughing fit and begun dry heaving, confusing him immensely. Moments later he stood to his feet and looked down. It was then that he noticed he seemed to be standing atop the water's surface. How the heck? The 7-year-old muttered in fearful surprise. He bent down and reached his hand into the water, only to immediately hit the ground. Now he really was starting to freak out, since he was submerged in the water not even a minute ago. He rose back to his full, short, height and checked his surroundings. He found himself in a large sewer with dozens of dull red pipes lining the walls. There was only one bright blue pipe stuck amongst the other pipes. The young blonde didn't know what to make out of it, so he continued to look around. It wasn't long before he noticed a dull red hue down the wet cavern. Obviously his young curious mind got the better of him and he took a step forward. That's when he started thinking about his condition. He checked his person and realized he didn't have a spot on him. He was back in his clean green shirt and black shorts. And even his sandals were back on his feet. Again, surprise filled his face. Because last he checked, his shirt had been ripped off and one of his shoes were lost somewhere in the marketplace. I don't know exactly where I am, but I'm just glad I'm not half, he said, resuming his short stride towards the red light at the end of the tunnel. Because of his harsh upbringing, courtesy of the villagers' severe treatment towards him, he had been forced to raise himself without proper guardianship. He was saved from losing his sanity thanks to the men and women residing in the red light district. They were the ones who taught him how to survive, not directly of course. He learned by watching. He learned how to pick pockets, without getting caught. It wasn't only pockets he learned to steal from. He's robbed stores for clothes and even swiped a few fruits from their stands. Doing it in broad daylight was near suicide, but he needed sustenance. Stealing after the sun went down was the best for the young blonde. He even learned how to widen his senses, involuntarily because he got picked a few times himself. Still the patrons of the red light district were better parents than his ever were, if only he knew who they were. He had absolutely no problems with it. Though, deep down, he always wished to know who his parents were and where the hell they were. It was getting obvious the Hokage wasn't going to be speaking to him about it. There's nothing I can do to make the old man tell me, the young blonde murmured. That's what I've told you before. A powerful voice echoed off the walls all around him. Naruto's eyes quickly widened to the size of dinner plates and he whirled around, expecting someone to be standing behind him. He released a small sigh of relief when he found nobody behind him. Who's there? He asked with a small hint of fear in his voice. He began to back up, keeping his destination in mind. Check behind you again. The voice spoke again, prompting the young boy to quickly spin. He was fooled as the only thing behind was air. You liar, there's nothing behind me. Naruto yelled, his fear replaced with frustrated anger. How about now? The blonde heard again, only this time it was accompanied with a hand resting on his shoulder, which began sizzling for some reason. Terror flashed in the young cerulean eyes, before anger filled them again. He turned, swiping at the figure. Who the hell are you and why are you in here? Naruto questioned, sneering at the tall man, who only seemed to be looking at his smoking hand. Didn't you forget to ask, where am I? Little boy, the man asked with a chuckle, turning his gaze to the boy. You. Just answer my questions. Naruto seethed through his clenched teeth, not paying attention to the crimson eyes. I'm hurt. I can't believe you don't remember me, the man said, holding his chest, for dramatic reasons. The man was tall, looking about 6 feet, 3 inches. Short and wild red hair adorned his head, with a few bangs covering his red-slitted eyes. He wore a simple red tunic over a long-sleeved black shirt. His camouflage-styled, red and black, pants were taped at the ankles. Lastly, his black boots ended his attire. Perhaps, this will refresh that dull memory of yours, he said, smirking, as he rose his hand and snapped his fingers. The sound echoed off the walls, causing all the pipes in front of him to brighten instantly. The new light cast a shadow behind the man. It revealed a new figure, a much larger figure. The shadow resembled a large roaring fox with 9 equally large tails. Recognition flashed through Naruto's ocean blue eyes. You're the fox. So I'm in my mind. Naruto said, looking around again. Wow, what a dreary place. Not what I remember last time I was in here. Naruto murmured, his anger dissipating for the time being. The newly revealed Kyuubi nodded. Yes, you were only 4. Your first beating. You don't need to continue. I already know what happened, I was there. Naruto said, walking down the tunnel. The two soon walked into a humongous room with a cage taking an entire side room. The blonde looked behind him, to see the apparition of the Kyuubi vanish, with thin traces of smoke returning to the cage. I'm not surprised you returned. It was only a matter of time. A deeper, more demonic voice said from behind the bars. The face of the 9 tails appeared from the shadows, a large toothy grin splitting its face. The fox itself was easily the size of the Hokage mountain, if not bigger. The beast's tails were twice the length of its body, and thicker than its head. Each of the 9 tails swayed randomly behind the beast, their movements nearly hypnotizing. Naruto narrowed his 7-year-old eyes at the malicious kitsune. Why am I here? He simply asked. The question made the fox grin even larger, each of the fox's sharp fangs on display. The sight intimidated the blonde a bit, but he didn't let it show. Don't act like you don't already know, the fox said, letting his statement hang in the air for a while. After a while he growled in annoyance, don't you think it's time for somebody to finally stop being stubborn? Let me tell you the truth of your heritage, because we both know the Hokage is never going to reveal such delicate information, the kitsune said, closing its mouth to appear more friendly towards the blonde. The young blonde looked down at his feet as he thought about the fox's word. It was true, 3 years ago he learned of the fox's existence inside of him. Naturally, it wasn't from the old man's mouth. After the first attack, he appeared in his mindscape and met the fox. Except the last time, his mind looked more like a forest filled with fruit and animals. The first words out of the fox's mouth was that he knew the secret the Hokage was keeping from him. At first the blonde was confused. Because why was there a giant fox in his mind, where he retreated into to escape from the pain his physical body was receiving? Fortunately, Naruto wasn't a dumb child. He quickly put things together and learned this fox was the same fox, responsible for destroying the village, 4 years prior. It was also responsible for cursing him with being the center of the hater in the village, despite his young age. He didn't want to trust the fox and swiftly declined its offer, wanting to give the old man a chance. Obviously the old man had remained tight-lipped, even to this day. His only course of action was the fox, who, if he thought about it, has been with him his entire life. Voluntarily or not, It was there, providing him with medical assistance. Do you really know who my parents are, or are you lying to my face to gain more of my trust? Naruto questioned with narrowed eyes, his gaze now on the large kitsune. He knew, somewhere in the back of his mind, the old man was never going to reveal such a guarded secret. So, the fox really was his only source of truth. The Kyuubi's chuckles filled the room, before it became roaring laughter. Pretty insightful, for one so young. Sadly, that is not my intent, well, at least not through lies, the fox said truthfully. He looked at the fox with different eyes. They were the same color, but they were no longer the eyes a child should possess. Before you tell me about my parents, what's your name? He asked, shocking the tailed beast. The large grin lessened as he wasn't expecting the question. This is a big surprise. He's the first to ever ask my name. The fox smirked. Actually, he's the only one I've talked to since my series of sealings. The fox thought again. You truly are different. It's Kurama. My real name is Kurama, he said softly before he began telling the blonde what he wanted to tell him years ago. Reality. Dirty ditch. Naruto awoke to find himself shirtless, shoeless, and an additional assortment of cuts and bruises covering his body. His blue eyes were darker, the same as when he was in the mindscape with the fox. Said fox had just revealed so much information that he left as soon as he was finished. He didn't have any questions, as the answers were given to him. He let out a dark chuckle when he noticed the sun was replacing the moon. I should have known. Nobody wants to help the demon, especially not the leader of the bunch. Naruto muttered. Even when I'm the son of the late Yondaime Hokage. He added softly. When that information was told in the beginning, he had to admit he was starting to really hate his old man. But in the end, he had to give the man his respect. He saved a bunch of worthless villages, but gave his son power beyond his own imagination, a fair trade if you ask Naruto. He struggled to stand to his feet, grateful Kurama was nearly finished with healing his wounds. He noticed he was near the edge of the village, so he leaned against a tree, to keep his weak knees from falling beneath him. Those bastards really hurt my legs. I guess they didn't want me running anymore. He thought, feeling the telltale signs of healing tissue regenerating under his skin. He stood against the tree for what was easily an hour. Just standing there, with nothing but his thoughts. It was obvious to him that nothing good would come out of staying in the village. He didn't have to put up with this any longer. Some civilians living near the edge of the village emerged from their houses to see him standing against the tree. One of the men smirked at the sight. I bet he knows his place now. We've finally broke him. Another man walked up to the first with a smirk of his own. He stayed right where we left him, like a good little demon. The first man's wife sneered at the demon. I don't like the way it's looking at us, she said, making the others smirk in agreement. Let's have some fun then. The two men said together, menacingly walking towards the young blonde. The wife was just a few feet behind them, following with the same malice in her stride. Naruto watched them coming closer to him. What the did I do this time? I'm tired of taking their beatings without defending myself. It's time for me to fight back. Naruto thought, pushing off the tree. He didn't really know how to fight, but he's had a peculiar feeling year after year that he's ignored. What the young blonde didn't know was, that feeling was something called killer instinct. It was similar to killer intent, except he was born with the natural impulses. It was ingrained into his DNA, having Kurama inside of him, only increased that desire 100-fold. How he ignored that feeling showed that his strength of will was overwhelming. The way that it worked, was it simply allowed him to see weak points in his opponents that will result in a kill. It was only useful for ones without the experience and couldn't see the openings themselves. Simply, it just made killing seem like a simple thing. There's no remorse afterwards that most others feel. What I'm trying to say was that it provided you with a strong analytical gaze. At that time, the three approaching attackers were now 10 feet away from the blonde. Naruto chose that time to hold his head and hiss in pain. The three civilians recoiled in slight surprise. But that was a mistake on their part as Naruto smirked. He broke in a quick dash and jumped to punch one of the men in the crotch. He used the following surprise to kick the second man in the side of his left knee, knowing that from his slight limp that it was a weak point. He used all his might. The sound of a snap was music to his ears before he was forced to dodge a wild strike from the first man. While he was ducked, the blonde scooped a pile of dirt before throwing it in a wide arc, successfully blinding only two of them. He used the distraction to throw his clenched fist into the woman's stomach. She doubled over in time for him to uppercut her in the chin. He swiftly turned his body and delivered a swift kick to the neck of the man with the broken knee. Though he didn't have enough power to completely snap the man's fat neck, he did send him into unconsciousness. He then turned his attention to the man that he hit in the crotch. He rose to his feet and swung another punch at the blonde. Naruto easily dodged it, and the next one, and the final one, all the while the man was yelling his frustrations. Naruto narrowed his eyes and swiftly jabbed the man in the throat, having to jump slightly in the air. That forced the man to stifle his voice as he began coughing, taking a knee in the process. Naruto smirked as he used the knee as a leverage to jump a bit higher so he could knee the man in the nose, pushing the cartilage into the man's brain, effectively killing him. Naruto's eyes flashed back to blue as he gazed at the heap of bodies and the crowd of villagers that heard the man's yelling. His eyes widened before he turned tail and sprinted through the village, the crowd of villagers in pursuit. Ki. Naruto panted in exhaustion as he leaned against a tree for the second time that morning. You're welcome, Kit. Naruto heard in his mind. The blonde nearly screamed in surprise, luckily he was too fatigued to perform the action. Kurama. Naruto asked breathlessly. What happened back there? Was that you? He asked after catching a small breath. It took a minute before Kurama answered. I'm sorry, Naruto. I would love to take credit for what just happened, but that was all you. You actually made me proud with your ferocity. Kurama said, instructing Naruto that he had to keep on the move. Aren't you glad I'm giving you enough chakra to keep your legs from snapping from under you? He asked with a chuckle. Naruto ignored the question and huffed for more air. The throb in his legs were becoming more apparent the longer he stood there. Now that he was outside the village, he was going to be hunted, as soon as the news got to the Hokage. You need to get going. It's about to rain and the sun is against you right now. Kurama said, urging the blonde to resume running. Hokage's office. Hiruzen stood to his feet, his eyes widened in shock and sorrow. His saddened surprise was quickly replaced with annoyance and anger. The blonde would always run and hide in the red light district after causing trouble. He wished it was that simple this time. He was not offered that luxury. This time the boy actually killed someone and fled from the village. He got the news about the runaway 5 minutes ago, from an unnamed Chunin. Already the search was against him, the approaching rain saw to that. Damn. He muttered, walking to his window, clenching his fist. Inuzukas and Abarames will be useless in this approaching weather. Contact 10 Hyuga Jonin and 39 Chunin. The Sandaime ordered his hidden Anbu agents. From what he understood, the blonde was already injured. He wouldn't be getting far, so his Anbu weren't all that necessary. Back with the blonde. The young blonde ran for 30 minutes before the first drop of rain pulled him from his concentration. Now aware of how long he's been running, his body roared at him to halt his actions. Suddenly the fox began talking again. Kit, give me control of your body. There's a den of mine in the area. If I can get you there quickly, you can rest easily. You don't have to worry about being followed, the rain will wash away your scent. Kurama ordered. Naruto had no choice but to relinquish control of his body. When he did that, he felt as if he was watching himself in third person. He noticed the changes to his face. His eyes turned red, with his pupil elongating, vertically. The marks on his cheeks grew darker. His canines jutted from his mouth, just a bit. His hair quickly thickened and grew bushier. Honestly, he didn't like the feeling of being outside of his own body. He looked cool though, and he noticed he was moving faster than when he was in control. Thankfully he didn't have to experience the feeling any longer because Kurama stopped at a small hill near a large pond. He did some hand seals and a seal array appeared and glowed hot red, before the earth was pulled apart in a makeshift door. Control was returned to him and he stepped through the door. He felt and heard it closing behind him. After the makeshift door closed, fire erupted in the room, illuminating the area. What was revealed was something that confused Naruto. It was just a big space with a large bay of hay in the middle. I don't even care, he said, dropping onto the unbelievably comfortable hate. He wasn't on it for even a minute before he was asleep. It wasn't long before he appeared back in his mindscape. This time he woke up directly in the large cage with Kurama. While your body sleeps, you'll be pulled in here to learn basic knowledge. You would surely be exempt from such an education if you were to stay in the village, he said, manifesting himself in his human form so he could better instruct the blonde. Naruto nodded, fully understanding the situation he was in. What about out there? What will I be learning? He questioned. Out there, your training will be more physical. We'll also work on your controlling your chakra, so you could learn ninja techniques. You're going to need a lot of chakra control training, because with me in here, it's going to be a nightmare, he said with a deep chuckle. Naruto didn't know enough about chakra control to see the humor in that statement. So you're going to be teaching me techniques. I remember spying on some ninja and saw them do awesome things. Will I be able to do the same things? He yelled, showing his excitement as he bounced on balls of his feet. Kurama let out another laugh. When I'm done with you, you'll be able to do that and then some. Right now we should focus on what you need the most knowledge in right now, survival, the kitsune said as he began telling Naruto what he needed to do in order to survive. Living on his own, outside of the village, was better than he thought it would be. The past 3 years has been the busiest 3 years in all of his decade of life. Kurama put him through all of his knowledge of survival and living off the fat of the land. He learned how to erase the scent from his body, to the point where he blended in with the environment. The fox taught him how to cover his tracks and, if need be, led somebody in the opposite direction. The most enjoyable of his survival lessons was the hunting portions. He lost count of how many boars, rabbits and deers he's killed. That went on for the past 3 years, with the addition of learning various shinobi techniques of everything but medical techniques. That was Kurama's job. He's also obtained a new attire, his old one lived out its life. Now he was wearing a black shirt under a white vest, that was currently unzipped. He also wore long black and white, camouflage pants with white tape around his ankles. He didn't wear any shoes, opting to keep feet wrapped with the same white tape around his ankles, leaving only some of his toes free. It was the same for his wrists and hands, stopping at his first knuckle. His blonde hair was a little longer and less spikier, with a long bang flowing down the left side of his face in a spiky arch. Also, joining his whisker marks, was a long scar going through all the marks on his right cheek. For some reason, that scar didn't heal right, so that's why it remained, marring his face. Although he wasn't complaining, it made him look cool. Naruto grunted, looking down at the body he was dragging. This fat bastard is way too heavy. Naruto thought, grunting again. The guild should be around here somewhere. I'm starting to get tired of lugging this fat, Naruto muttered in anger. Kurama, after this we need to go over more fuinjutsu. The item seal array is different from a living organism seal array, the blonde mentally told the demon. I told you months ago, before you started doing this, learn more fuinjutsu. It's not my fault you put it off for later. The blonde immediately sensed Kurama was annoyed with him. Naruto rolled his eyes, still dragging the unconscious fat man. It's also not my fault they want this guy alive. The other 4 guys were wanted dead or alive, it's just the course of the fight had them dying on me. Naruto thought out loud with an annoying huff. It is surprising an Akimichi defected from the village. Kurama said. And an evil one makes it all the more surprising. Who would expect that to happen? The kitsune added. Naruto grunted, not caring about the former clan member. He's lucky he's wanted alive, or I would have killed him. The blonde thought with disdain that made him question why he even accepted the bounty in the first place. Of course, Kurama said with a viscous smirk. All conversation with the fox ceased when the blonde arrived at a medium-sized, brown-colored, building. It was 2 stories, with only 2 visible windows for each floor. The roof was flat with a large bird cage on top. The population around the building was minimal, compared to the other guilds he's been to. A total of 15 individuals were outside, conversing amongst themselves. Some nodded to him, impressed with his capture. He nodded back, returning their respect. He knew personally that they only showed him that kind of respect was because of the small stature, common with his age. Hey kid, you need any help with that body? A voice spoke to Naruto's right. The blonde didn't spare the man a single glance, instead opted to continue dragging the living body. He rolled his eyes at the man's offer. No, I don't. He swiftly declined. He made that mistake with his first bounty. He stupidly accepted someone's offer to turn his bounty in, while he used the bathroom and they stole his money. He didn't panic though. He easily tracked the man down and beat the living tar out of him, before retrieving his money. After that he made his way in search of his next bounty, this Akamichi being his 4th. He shook his head to rid himself of walking down memory lane. He looked forward at the medium-sized building and dragged the body inside to see 10 more individuals enjoying alcoholic beverages. Ah, I was wondering when you would show up. Naruto heard from the clerk behind the counter. So you really did it. I'm impressed. The clerk was a man, seeming to be around his late 30s, maybe early 40s. His shaggy black hair was showing hints of gray, but that was most likely because of the many fights the other bounty hunters would get into on a regular basis. He was wearing a long-sleeved gray shirt, that was all that was seen as he was behind the counter. Naruto nodded, accepting the man's praise, as he dropped the head of the Akamichi down on the wooden ground. A groan was heard as Naruto went to shake the man's hand. So you did get my message? Naruto asked with a cheerful tone. Thank the heavens. Naruto added in relief. The clerk shook the small hand with surprising strength, and perhaps a little intimidation. Naruto smiled as he returned the shake with his own squeeze. This was common in the guilds. It was all about respect in the bounty hunter guilds, between the clerks and the hunters. Naruto couldn't stop the memories flooding his mind to when he shook hands with a female clerk down in Kase no Kuni. Wind Country. The blonde's eyes flashed amber to show that he was becoming irritated. The man quickly released the boy's hand, not in fear, but in amusement. Right so, let's seal Chomaru's chakra right up and tie him down. I'll contact Konoha and they'll send some guys to pick him up, he said as 2 large helpers came and struggled to carry the man to the back. Naruto nodded again, of course. Now according to the poster, my reward comes up to 20,000 ryo, the blonde said crossing his arms. 20,000 is only valid along with the poster, otherwise we keep 25%, the man said crossing his own arms. Naruto smirked as he reached into his vest. Oh, of course, he said removing the poster from the pocket inside his vest. The clerk nodded and went into the back to gather the blonde's money. Naruto studied the man, noticing the wall behind him was covered in seals. There looked to be a blood seal, along with a personal chakra seal. There was also half a dozen defensive seals that would protect against intruders. There was no doubt that the man was ex-shinobi, most likely from Kumo, since this is its home country. Minutes passed and he came back with the money. Naruto thanked the man and sealed the money into the seal on the other side of his vest. Meanwhile he walked to the board near the entrance exit for a new target to hunt. Like always, the board was divided by rank. Bounty hunters were strong in their own right, but they never went after B-rank bounties, like the Akamichi. There was a Chunin, but it was mostly his home clan that garnered the boost in rank, because he wasn't all that strong. They really only showed B ranks for the more daring hunters who wanted to gain more reputation, and other missing nins, who just needed money. Naruto's eyes browsed over each of the bounties, checking who was wanted dead and who was wanted alive. Some specifically said that they didn't care, as long as the person was brought in. 15,000 for she now. What a weird name, but meh. Naruto thought, taking the C-rank bounty and studying it more intently. Obviously the man isn't going to be in Mizu no Kuni. Kurama started as Naruto left the building. You can try Hai no Kuni, at your own risk of course, he added after a moment. Naruto shook his head, looking at the various crimes. They were petty thefts, but the more he went down the list he could tell that it was getting annoying, until of course he stole something valuable. Let's see, he's wanted alive for punishment. But he's a Kurigakure Chunin, and they're busy with their civil war that they can't send their hunter nins after him. Naruto thought, as this was the first Kurigakure shinobi that he's had to hunt. What was his last location? Kurama asked as the blonde begun turning over the paper. Right here in Kaminari no Kuni, though this poster is months old, he might not be here anymore. It's going to take a while to track this guy down. Naruto thought with a sigh. It shouldn't be too hard, not many people have black hair. Kurama said, laughing loudly halfway through the sentence. Naruto audibly growled at the kitsune. You know what, Kurama, you're a real, Naruto thought before trailing off. Wait. He thought, feeling something different in the air. He widened his senses and tensed his muscles. He couldn't really sense anyone other than the other bounty hunters, but he could still tell that something was off. The eerie feeling was still in the air, he knew this feeling. It was the feeling of being hunted. Ah crap, not again. Ki. Naruto gasped as another kunai whizzed by his ear. Damn, these guys are persistent. He yelled as he continued to evade the men in white masks, at least he thought they were all men. There was a total of 4 of them. Judging by how long they were keeping up with him, the blonde had to gauge their abilities at High Chunin, at the very least. Evading them is easy for you, but you can't keep running from them. You're strong enough now use what I taught you and send them to hell. Kurama said with some impatience. This wasn't the first time, these people has tried to kill him many times these past 3 years. Every time though, Kurama was able to help him evade. It was only this past year that he was able to evade on his own. Well, when you're right, the blonde muttered before vanishing in the wind with a body flicker. The 4 masked pursuers couldn't stop their momentum and ended up in the middle of the clearing. They pressed their backs together, knowing that they were no longer in control of the hunt. They also knew it was going to be trouble if either of them broke formation. Now the blonde had a clear look at his attackers, they seemed to be wearing the same type of armor. Anbu styled obviously, but they didn't seem like the typical Konoha Anbu. He was right though, one of them was a female, judging by the slightly contrast in her armor's design. Who are you and why are you chasing me? Naruto asked from all around the clearing. He watched them all turn and face his location, having sensed, milliseconds before, where his chakra originated. Having no choice but to reveal himself, Naruto's fingers twitched in anticipation. We are nobody. The presumed leader plainly said. The blonde stared at him blandly. Is he serious? He thought with a raised eyebrow. Be cautious, Naruto. Remember, they're skilled, and have more experience than you. They most likely have tricks up their sleeves too. Kurama warned his student. Of course, sensei. I won't let them survive this fight. Naruto thought, taking a stance. His left arm was extended and his hand was only inches from his face. His knees were spread slightly and bent, poised to spring into attack mode at any moment. His body was slightly twisted, his left foot in front of him. Lastly, his right arm was behind his back, with his fingers still twitching every now and again. The 4 masked assailants lined up horizontally, before spreading out across the wasteland-like area. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he glanced at each of his opponents. He's never fought more than 3 people at a time, but it looked like he didn't have any other choice. Well, there's no time like the present, he said, hoping it would throw his enemies off. He dashed forward at surprising speeds. The others immediately tensed, switching to defense mode. Before he reached them, the blonde vanished in a burst of fire. Flying embers caused the team to scatter in different directions. He reappeared near one of them and his fist turned fiery red. Kaden. Hano no Danmaku. Flame barrage, he muttered, landing scorching blows on the human punching bag. Red fire erupted around his fist, and after the 10th consecutive punch landed, he jumped back and watched the burned body fall to the floor. Naruto smirked and faced the other three. It instantly dropped when he seen the fourth one rejoin them. He didn't have to check the burned body to know it was a slightly melted boulder. Damn substitution. The blonde cursed himself for not expecting that. That was pretty good. You even managed to burn part of my armor. The man monotonously spoke, just like the leader before. Now it's our turn to be on the offensive. The only woman of the group spoke with a lighter, monotonous voice. Then they all rushed the blonde, save for the leader, who simply watched from behind. Naruto let out a surprised shriek when he felt his ankles being grabbed from below. 5. He yelled in his mind while physically struggling, but to no avail. They closed the distance in seconds. The first man swiped at him, with what looked like iron claws poking out of his gloves. He dodged the swipe by bending backwards. While bent backwards, he noticed a lone figure in the air dropping like a stone towards him. He growled when he felt each of his arms being wrapped by two separate pairs of arms. He could do nothing except notice the figure started spinning, creating a cyclone. The blonde took a few quick breaths to get his chakra flowing in the right way. Raiden. Denryoku Saji. Power surge, he yelled as an electrical current crackled to life around him. The sudden lightning weakened their hold on the blonde, which allowed him to freely substitute milliseconds before the impact. That was entirely too close. Naruto's voice pierced through the large cloud of dirt. Although that technique didn't require that many hand seals, he was thankful he was able to execute it the way he did. He was also thankful that he substituted away from the impending impact. Again, I have to give you praise. This time, for killing one of the element. One of the masked members said. It took a full minute for the cloud to clear to show only a single pile of twisted bones, blood covering the entirety of the mess. But the other four assailants weren't in sight. Elements. It must have been the Earth one. Naruto thought, scanning his surroundings, now knowing that he was once again being hunted. Do you even care that one of your teammates is dead? Naruto asked, again expanding his senses. Care? What is that? One of the assailants said as a single kunai with an explosive tag tied to it, flew from behind a boulder. Suddenly it multiplied into dozens of kunai that filled the blonde's sight. Also, a second after the multiplied projectiles were created, his comrade appeared behind them. Futon. Datapa. Great breakthrough, she said before blowing out a large gust of wind, speeding the wall of kunai. Naruto's eyes widened as he quickly turned around and ran for his life. You crazy bastards! He yelled out, running as fast as he could. He mentally listed off his techniques, to see if either one could successfully protect him from this danger. If he sent out a pulse of chakra to set the tags off prematurely, there was a chance they'll speed up so fast he'll have no chance to do anything else. He mentally kicked himself when he forgot about what he just used a few minutes ago. A quick kawarimi later and he was safe from the explosions which went off seconds later. Alright guys, if I die, don't tell anybody about this part of the fight, he said, turning to see all four of them together. I'm serious, he said with a pleading look. He didn't get any kind of response from the four remaining elements. I hate you guys, he said with a frown. I guess there's no way to keep you guys from telling if you're alive, I'll have to change that, he said before they threw another salvo of sharp projectiles at him. His right hand started glowing and he unsealed his special weapon, a scythe. He quickly twirled the weapon in his hand to deflect the sharp projectiles. His scythe looked old in a sense. The 66-inch shaft was crafted from the finest obsidian. The curved blade itself was around 4 feet and sharpened on both sides. A thin black stripe was shown between the two silver edges on the blade. Naruto closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he reopened them, his previous cerulean irises were replaced with amber-colored orbs. With the change, the air was filled with frigid malice. The changed blonde didn't say a word, except crack his neck, before he charged. Ki. A figure stood 100 meters away from the fight, watching with an impressed eye. This is quite the sight. Little Blondie sure knows how to fight. He smiled at the soft rhyme before he took out a notepad and scribbled the line inside for later. The man was kind of tall with dark skin and a muscular build. His hair was very pale blonde, borderline white. The same went for his goatee. Around his head was his Kumo forehead protector held together by white cloth. He wore oval-shaped sunglasses, that just seemed to stick to his face, because nothing was holding them up. On his left cheek, he has a tattoo of a bull's horns, with the bottom one being the shorter of the two. On his right shoulder was a large kanji for iron. He wore a long scarf around his neck. He also wore his village's standard one strap over a single shoulder flak jacket, and a long red rope belt tied around his waist. He didn't wear a shirt under his flak jacket. He also wore Kumo's standard hand and shin guards, and shinobi sandals. On his back was a bulky sword holder, that held all 7 of his swords. Don't intervene, I want to see what Kurama's done with the boy, a voice said inside of the man's head. Not that I was going to, I share the same feelings as you. Ki. The fight hadn't been going on for long. Naruto's eyes scanned the 3 remaining elements. They pierced through the masks, causing him to smirk at their dwindling numbers. He surprised the water element when he swung his scythe earlier than expected, releasing a blade of fire the man couldn't dodge in time. It ended with him being bisected horizontally at the waist. He knew he had to pick them off one at a time, and not use the same tactic more than once. Now they were more than aware of his fire affinity. He had to admit, he may be strong, but he didn't like long battles. He wasn't made for them, at least not yet. It was then that a thought came to mind. I haven't used you in a fight yet, Kurama. How about you give me some chakra? He asked. He initiated his initial transformation as soon as the trio wove through different sets of hand seals. They then launched a fireball, wind bullet, and a lightning bolt at him. The changed blonde smirked as he gripped his scythe tightly before jumping to the side. He landed on a boulder and instantly rebounded off into the air. He started spinning horizontally as the air around him began to distort with heat. Kaden. Hano no wa. Flame wheel, he thought, getting a little dizzy. He released the chakra and sent the flames down to the earth. He watched, with dizzied eyes, as the assailants jumped out of the way. The 2 remaining males drew their tantos from their backs and dashed to where the blonde was going to eventually land, while the other prepared a set of hand seals. Naruto grinned, temporarily resealing his scythe. As soon as he got within range, about 10 feet, he swung both of his arms in a wide arc, roaring loudly. Bright blue flames erupted from thin air, surprising the 2 males as their bodies caught on fire. Unfortunately for them, their armor wasn't protective enough to withstand the extreme heat of the blue flames. Piercing screams were heard from the previously emotionless warriors, as their bones were quickly charred to ash. Naruto watched with bloodlust eyes, as he successfully ignited the air with blue flames. Usually he would have to be concentrating really hard to do that, but of course using some of Kurama's chakra made it easier to manipulate. His ear twitched as he roared in triumph. He had only used a bit of Kurama's chakra, most of that was because of him. He was getting closer to full control. I'm almost there. He muttered, his crimson eyes returning to blue as he clenched and unclenched his fist in thought. His danger sense went off and he barely braced himself before blades of wind launched him backwards, while simultaneously cutting into his arms and attire. Blood splattered against the rock he crashed into, cracking it slightly. He grunted in pain as Kurama worked to heal and close the wounds on his arms, as they took the brunt of damage. You idiot, pay attention. You can celebrate when everyone's dead. Kurama yelled in rage, sending as much chakra he could through the seal to heal his container. Naruto grunted in agony. He didn't take as much damage as he thought he would. It was just that he hit his head really hard, and it made him super dazed. His eyes were half-lidded and he noticed the woman walking closer to him. His heart pounded, painfully, in his chest as she inched closer to him. He noticed she was swaying her hips slowly, an action she was ignorant to. She slowly started unsheathing her tanto. Naruto sat there, mesmerized in a trance, having never seen something that was a mix of danger and arousing. His arms were hurting like hell, but if this woman was going to be the end of him, it would really piss him off. When the thought of her killing him came to mind, his eyes immediately flashed crimson amber. He forcibly extended his arm while simultaneously unsealing his scythe. The weapon of death was already going full speed in motion when it appeared. The woman assassin had expected something like this to happen, so she stopped short of the weapon's full distance. Unfortunately for her, Naruto used the force of the thrust to grab the end of the scythe and release the contraption that kept it sealed. The shaft suddenly extended, via hidden chain system inside the shaft. She didn't calculate that and lost her head because of it, literally. The blonde released a breath he didn't know he was holding as he flashed a soft smile. I won, my head hurts, he said, slowly closing his eyes. He had to snap his eyes back open when he sensed another chakra signature appear a dozen meters in front of him. No rest, another enemy. Naruto thought, pulling his scythe back. He slowly rose to his feet to glare at the newcomer. By now, both his arms and head were throbbing slightly. He charged, limply dragging his scythe behind him. His pupils elongated as Kurama fueled his body with his chakra to withstand the slight pain it was feeling. The man held up his hands in a surrendering position. Whoa, chill yo. I ain't the enemy, I'm your bro. But Naruto paid it little mind. At the moment he saw the man as an enemy. He swung his scythe with all his power. It simply breezed by the man. The blonde just simply used the momentum to keep on spinning. The man kept backing up, dodging the blade from cutting into him. Naruto then slammed it into the ground and used it like a pole vault. He then launched himself into a flying fist. The Kumo Jonin caught the fist and chopped the blonde in the neck, effectively knocking him out. He's so puny, but so bothersome. That's it, I'm done, I'm going home, gonna get my drink on, son, yeah, he said, kicking the blonde's body up onto his shoulder. 6 hours later, Mindscape. Naruto sat in a room that only had one window and sadly it let no light in. Kurama, how long has it been? Just let me out. The blonde said, his arms bound by thick beige rope. Stop with your whining. You know damn well you're still getting punished for that fight. The fox said, his voice dripping with anger. Naruto groaned as he was forced to relive his shame. The entire time he was unconscious was spent in a never-ending loop. He was forced to watch himself in third person and every time he regretted not being fully attentive. Although he braced himself for impact, he still obtained some damage. And then attacking the other stranger who appeared out of nowhere, ignoring Kurama's warnings not to fight the man. He realized after the 50th time that this was also a test in genjutsu. His goal was to successfully end the looping illusion. But after the 100th loop, he reminded himself that breaking out of a fox's illusion was easier said than done. It wasn't as simple as causing yourself pain to disrupt the illusion. It was only now that he realized that he was in his own mind and he just needed to regain control. Again, easier said than done, but nothing was impossible. He concentrated for what seemed like hours, and in his mind, it was. He's been sitting in the Indian position the entire time, his fingers in the ram position behind him. It was doing next to nothing in help in canceling the illusion. He cursed at himself for not having more mental power. Wait, mental power. I'll just give myself more power and then break out. He mused as everything brightened around him before shattering. Reality. Naruto noticed he was back in the real world when the sound of beeping machines echoed in the background. The sound was alien to him, since the single time he woke up in the hospital, the machines were off. That's when it hit him. Wait, machines. He thought, snapping his eyes open, only to quickly close them as the bright light nearly blinded him. He opened his eyes again, albeit at a slower pace, and scanned the room. He looked to his right to see a window, proudly displaying large clouds and a portion of a mountain's peak. Whoa, I'm high up. He thought out loud. Of course you're high. How else would we hide in the clouds? A voice spoke to the blonde's left. Said blonde stiffened in shock. He'd been scanning his surroundings for signs of malicious intent, the entire time he's been woke, so about 2 minutes. He turned his head, slowly, to gaze upon a mountain of muscle wearing the Kumogakure cage cloak. He widened his eyes at the large man. Other than the cloak, he wasn't wearing any other upper attire. Though he was wearing a large set of golden bracers on both of his arms. Thankfully, he was wearing a pair of dark gray pants. Another thing of note was the large golden belt, displaying a boar's face. Damn, you're huge. The blonde couldn't help but yell in surprise. The mountain of muscle let out a boisterous laugh. I have to say, you're far more interesting than I could have imagined. I'm sorry for being rude, the Yondaime Reikage. Naruto's eye looked at the man's hat atop his head and nodded his head, already knowing what his status was. I'm sorry for my rudeness, Reikage-sama. The blonde said, hoping he'll accept his apology. Whoa, I'm in Kumogakure. He added, amazed, once again looking out the window. No need for that, it should be me apologizing. My brother told me about how he found you. I'm sorry for his actions. Maybe if had acted soon, you wouldn't be in here. Spoke with a soft tone. Naruto stared at him in thought, before he closed his eyes and leaned his head back. Your apology isn't needed either. I'm in here because I wasn't paying attention and was reckless. At the time, I thought he was another enemy, coming to finish the job, so I attacked. Obviously it didn't end well. Naruto said, opening his eyes to search the room for any other people. He wasn't disappointed to find that room empty, save for the two of them and a few machines. Naruto, he knows I'm in here. I can also feel two of my kin in the village. Kurama explained, making Naruto mentally nod. So he turned his view back to the window, again marveling at the height he was. Surely there must be some alternate reason I'm being visited by the Reikage. Or why I'm even in Kumogakure. Perhaps it has something to do with the 9 tails in my gut. Naruto said, looking straight at the man, only to see him smiling wide. Of course, but I have a question. With the knowledge that Konoha was in possession of the Kyuubi, it vexes me to see you outside of its walls. Why is that? I would have been sure they would try to hold on to you for as long as you lived. I asked, crossing his arms, now donning his cage face. Naruto looked at the man's face for a full minute before he leaned back again and lowered his eyelids. To make a long story short, I left, he said with a long sigh. I nodded, fully understanding. His fingers were busy scratching his beard in long, thoughtful strokes. I know what you've been through. My brother faced the same treatment for years, after becoming the container for the Hachibi. The same went for Yugito-chan, the container for the Nibi. Everything changed after they earned the people's respect, like any other shinobi under my command, he said, smiling at the blonde's shocked face. Naruto couldn't believe what the man was revealing. So the people here aren't all that prejudiced towards Jinchurikis? Naruto questioned with a hopeful tone. I chuckled at the young boy. In this village, containers are now treated with respect. After my brother gained complete control of his biju and began teaching Yugito how to do the same, they began to be treated like the heroes they are. I'm not going to lie though, even that took time, he said, feeling proud of the changes his villagers went through. Naruto looked at it with large, nearly pleading eyes. He had promised himself that he would never join a village that hated his kind, that's why he didn't stay in Suna. That and because it was way too dry over there. I never thought containers were capable of being loved by anyone, he said, again thinking of his and the Ikibi's situation. Perhaps, if you were to stay here, you can experience the love within these walls. It's either that or go back to being a run-of-the-mill bounty hunter. Sure, you can scrape by with the bounties you've collected so far, but sooner or later, Konoha will find you again, and this time, they will kill you. Spoke with rough authority. Nato gulped, suddenly feeling nervous. How did he know he was a bounty hunter? Did he have spies watching him? Kit, he must have found the poster in your vest. Calm down. Kurama calmed the blonde with his words. The blonde mentally sweat dropped in embarrassment. Oh. He thought, mentally rubbing the back of his head. He looked at A, who was now looking out of the window. He was no doubt loving the look of serenity of his village. Konoha already found me once. Even though I know next time, I won't be so distracted, I'll accept your invitation to stay in the village, he said as a slowly turned to face him. Before he could speak, Naruto cut him off, but on one condition. A chuckled, already having a feeling of where this was going. Of course, I'll further your training. But that condition needs a condition of its own. The 10-year-old Uzumaki stared at the wreckage. The man already knew what he wanted, but the blonde didn't know what the man wanted. As long as we reach a fine compromise, I'm cool with anything. Nato said as his stomach growled. Naruto rubbed his head in embarrassment as he couldn't think of when he ate last. Smirked as he returned his gaze back out the window. I'm glad to hear you say that. He spoke mysteriously with a haunting chuckle. Naruto didn't know how to take that, but something told him that it was going to be an exciting event. A full year passed, with the blonde's training reaching new peaks. The training A was still putting him through was supernatural. If it wasn't for Kurama's healing and encouragement, he would have given up. His brother, Killer B, gave him plenty of further instructions for tapping into Kurama's power. Though anything after 5 Tales of version 1, there were complications. And don't even get him started on anything version 2 related. The seal was preventing more of Kurama's chakra from reaching the blonde. Said seal was obviously designed to unlock more of the chakra over time, unless it was manipulated with a key. They learned that through Kurama's explanation, having studied the seal of his entrapment for so long. Forging a key was nigh impossible. If Naruto wanted the power, he really had to rip the seal off the cage and take it. The blonde obviously wasn't going to do that. The two might be cooperative towards each other, but they weren't friends. It was more like a, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, type of deal. The fox trains and heals him, while the blonde stays alive and entertains the fox with lots of battles and deaths. Killer B had to give the 4th Hokage his props for the masterful seal. Naruto was peeved he couldn't progress any further. He was calmed by Yugito ni, who has also been receiving instructions from B. But could he really complain? Again, after another year, he looked back on the events that led him to his freedom and smiled brightly. Though he was back under the grasps of another village, Kumo was a much better match for him than Konoha ever will be. No only was he getting even stronger than he was, but now, he gained a small circle of friends. There was Killer B's own students, who he found out were about 2 years older than him. They were already genin, and it seemed they might be able to promote to the next rank any time they wanted. A man named Darui was like a cool uncle to him, with his smooth attitude. Lastly, Yugito, the Nibi container, became his closest friend and partner. She was a few years older than him, 4 to be exact, making her 15. They had met approximately 8 months prior to this date. It was around the time when the blonde started his training under Killer B. She was a fair-skinned individual, a rarity in the village hidden in the clouds. Her blonde hair was far longer than his and obviously straighter, thought it looked darker. Her attire was much like his, a plain black shirt under a light gray armor vest. Her arms were covered by light gray forearms guards along with light gray, fingerless, gloves. Light gray shin guards were over her black pants and black sandals covered her feet. Resting atop her head was her hunter mask, with Kumo's symbol along the forehead section. Truly the uniform of a hunter nin. A hat allowed him to retain his hunting position, between training. It must have been some of the fox's personality leaking through the seal, but he absolutely loved the hunt. Though the Raikage informed him that Kumo's hunter nins operated in pairs. He felt like he was already a genin of the village, which he technically was, though he didn't have a true Jonin sensei and a set group of comrades. A partner was greatly appreciated, the blonde boy couldn't have asked for anything else. The armor was also appreciated as well, his matching the other blondes. Yugito was truly an amazing teenaged female. She was one of the hunter's rising stars, having chosen this profession at the timid age of 10. You could say she was a mentor to Naruto, though there wasn't anything new for Naruto to learn in the hunting game. Naruto's attire was slightly different, obviously being designed to fit males. His mask was also resting atop his head as he looked over at Yugito, who he was running beside. B rank, Raijin Sawagaku, missing nin from Kumogakure. Crimes consisting of rapes of women, young girls and even a few young boys. Let's see, he also killed off his last team and attempted arson of the Raikage building. Our most recent intel says he was last seen in the next town. Yugito said firmly, keeping the disgust from her voice, whilst she continued running towards the mentioned town. I don't think he's very smart. He's had 7 months on the run and he chooses to remain inside of Kaminari no Kuni. He must think with his muscles. Naruto said, shaking his head. You were the same when your muscles started developing. Yugito said, briefly running closer to the other blonde to poke his bicep. Plus, he might think that we would search outside of the country, instead of inside. We would still be, if we hadn't gotten the intel about his whereabouts. Yugito added. They continued to run in, uninterrupted silence before arriving at a cliff. Said cliff overlooked a rather large town. A town, neither of them has gone to, though they were still familiar with the area. We should change our clothes, you know, look the part of children wandering the streets. If he was to see our armor, it would immediately tip him off of what our intentions are. Yugito said as they looked over the village. The Uzumaki looked over at her with a grin. Great minds think alike. This'll be the perfect time for you to slip into something more comfortable. Naruto said, watching the other blonde. That was Kurama's idea. He immediately added, clasping his hand over his mouth, while widening his eyes a bit. She visibly stiffened before walking towards the only large boulder around. Laughing echoed in Naruto's mind. I think that was an invitation gaki. The large kitsune said between hiccups of laughter. You're gonna get me in trouble, furball. Naruto chastised the demon. Naruto nervously chuckled and took a step in the other blonde's direction. He immediately stopped when a kunai suddenly appeared, in a flash of steel, right near his foot. Alright, I'm definitely in trouble. I'll just change my own clothes somewhere else, he muttered, walking in the opposite direction, his head down. The two blondes weren't going to meet up with each other, until either of them finds their target, plenty of enough time for her to forgive and forget. Until then, they were just going to communicate with each other using their two-way radio thingies. That is, if the leader of the duo wanted to speak to him. At that moment Naruto put the aforementioned device into his ear. It fit perfectly and wasn't visible unless you were right next to him, looking right into his ear. Key. By the time Naruto reached the town below, the sun was fully in the sky, meaning it was exactly 12 o'clock noon. His new clothes were simple, any regular civilian child would be wearing the same style of clothing. A black shirt with blue shorts and black shoes. He kept the tape around his arms, to hide his seals, but feigning it like he was injured. He even added some dirt over it. The only thing that would possibly tip the man off that the blonde had shinobi training was the scar going through his whisker marks, or even maybe, his whisker marks. Originally, he was against wearing shoes, but when the situation calls for them, he had no choice. That didn't mean he liked all the extra bulk the shoes gave his feet, at least when it was just the tape, he was able to feel the ground beneath his feet. I know you and the Nibi had history once upon a time ago, but please leave Yugi-chan and I out of it. Naruto thought, sternly, to the fox. I'll think about it, thought about it, my answer's still no. It's amusing torturing you too and I know my minx is thinking the same thing. Kurama spoke with laughter echoing throughout Naruto's mind, again. The blonde frowned and held his head lower. I could just ignore your advice. Silence reigned in the mindscape. It was so quiet, a dropped pin had the ability of causing an avalanche. That would be so, if I had actually been telling you to say those things. You can blame me all you want, Gaki, but we both know you have a crush on that particular container. Kurama spoke, making Naruto hang his head more, a blush reaching his cheeks, knowing full well that it was true. I remember when it started off as admiration and respect for seeing another Jinchuriki. Then it blossomed into seeing her as a sister figure, for about maybe a month, before it went into the crush you have now. Kurama explained, knowing the blonde could sense the smirk he was wearing. She isn't the only one. He spoke up quickly, cutting Naruto's response. You also like that short-tempered red-headed girl, for some reason. What's her name again? Kurama asked, drawing a blank. Karui. The blonde simply answered, his blush seemingly increasing in color. Can you blame me? Her feisty personality tells you that she won't take shit from anybody. Especially you. Kurama added with a chuckle. Also, what about the large-eyed blonde? That might be a lot more on the lust side of a crush. Kurama asked, again drawing a blank. You don't have to ask about Samui like that. Naruto replied, said girl entering his mind along with the others, his blush increasing tenfold, making him look like a walking tomato. She was the trickiest one to read, he didn't know what she was thinking. She always acted like she was on a mission, her facial expression never changing from seriousness. It's possible that she doesn't express anything else because of her large counterweights. She most likely just needs a long break, perhaps with a massage. The blonde put on a happy face and waved to everybody who waved at him. That actually makes sense. I'll offer her one, next time we're both in the village. He thought before he passed a small shop. He nearly completely passed it, before he felt a larger than normal chakra signature inside. He smiled when he entered. It seemed Lady Luck was smiling down on him. There, looking at a stack of candy, was Raijin himself. Also there seemed to be a lot of candy at the front of the store. This definitely was going to help him with gaining Yugito's forgiveness. Raijin wasn't overly muscular, but you could obviously tell he trained his body. Hopefully he doesn't notice that the blonde treats his body the same. The man had short and spiky brown hair. He was wearing a dark gray shirt with black pants and black boots. Around his right bicep was a white strip of cloth. The reasons were unknown, but from where Naruto stood, it looked like a wound was underneath. Whether it was recent or not was a mystery. The smile remained on his face as he walked over to get some candy of his own. Also he promised Omoi he would buy some lollipops anyway, for a price of course. That boy was not a good gambler, he kept overthinking things, not trusting his instincts. Let's hope she actually pays me back this time. Naruto muttered on purpose, much to Kurama's amusement. Also because it was a part of his bait. Pardon. A voice spoke to Naruto's left. The fist caught the bait pretty fast. The young blonde looked up at the tall missing nin. The man was looking down on him with a raised eyebrow and a certain look in his eye. Oh, you heard that? He asked with a chuckle, while rubbing his head. My friend wants me to buy her some lollipops. But she never pays me back. Naruto said, pulling off a pout. The brown-haired man laughed. Get used to it, kid. Women become rather needy, and they start young too. He said, patting the young blonde on his shoulder, looking up and down his body, before walking towards the counter. Naruto shook his head and shuddered at the retreating man. He's so lucky I don't just simply kill him now. It would be so easy. Naruto muttered through his clenched teeth. You found the target. Yugito's brisk voice sounded in Naruto's ear, having heard what he said. Naruto's ear twitched and he used an undetectable amount of chakra to carry his whisper to the two-way radio in his ear. Affirmative, Yugi-chan. Naruto replied quickly. This was the very first thing he learned after becoming a hunter. This was only his third target, since he trained most of the time. They had spent the past 2.5 weeks tracking down Raijin, faster than the last team sent after the man. Excellent. Place the tracker on him quietly and quickly. We'll dispatch of him somewhere private. Yugito spoke again. Yeah. Naruto mumbled before running to the counter in childlike excitement. The older man had sensed the boy's unusual chakra coming and stepped aside. Naruto smirked a bit and his finger brushed against the fabric of his shirt as he passed by. Piece of cake. Naruto thought before tossing 5 cherry lollipops, 2 blueberry lollipops and 3 watermelon lollipops on the counter. How much Obaa-chan? He asked the middle-aged woman, who sent the blonde a weak glare. She wasn't that old. Raijin shook his head at the young blonde, before leaving. He was none the wiser about the minuscule beacon of chakra radiating from his shirt. 2 hours passed before Naruto and Yugito thought they should meet up with each other. The beautiful container was wearing a navy blue tank top, a white skirt that went to the middle of her thighs. Her white and blue socks covered her entire shins, and her blue shoes completed her attire. Naruto flashed a smile at her choice of clothing. Looking good, Yugi-chan. Naruto said, going for a hug. The nibby container blocked his attempt with a stiff arm. Stop fooling around so we could get back to work, she said, fixing him with a stern stare. Naruto pouted with an unenthused salute. Aye, Captain. He spoke before slowly walking west. They walked for a few minutes before Naruto's stomach rumbled to life. You read my mind, stomach. I'm hungry, he said, giving Yugito a pleading look. Please, can we get something to eat? Yugito released a sigh and rolled her eyes. You're always hungry, she huffed out. The whiskered blonde groaned as his stomach growled again. I'm trying, stomach, by she's being a meanie, Naruto said, poking his gut. Yugito released an annoyed sigh. Stop talking to your stomach. Don't listen to her, find some food, Naruto said, voicing his own stomach. Yugito rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. I have to listen to her. She's my beautiful captain, Naruto responded to his gut. Said beautiful captain blushed lightly. He was always calling her beautiful to have things go his way, and they always worked. Fine. We'll take a break, but you're paying, she said in defeat. Naruto cheered and let his nose guide him to their lunch. An hour later, the two blonde left a small restaurant. The lady working there thought the two were siblings and wouldn't shut up about it. It seems they were having a special that day, siblings eat a small discounted price. Neither of them corrected the lady and simply ate their lunch. Naruto contently patted his stomach. Who knew mountain lion could be so delicious? He thought out loud, ending with a light burp. You really missed out, Yugi-chan, he said, knowing she only had some fried fish. I can't believe you just ate that. It's like you just ate me, she said, immediately blushing dark red after. Whoa, Kurama yelled in Naruto's mind as Naruto laughed with a light blush. It was obvious Matabi was venting her anger through Yugito's mouth. The female container tried to storm off in embarrassment, but Naruto grabbed her wrist. I know that wasn't you, Yugi-chan. You don't have to leave. Listen, I won't eat any more felines, or at least in front of you. So let's just find this guy, kill him, and then go home for some sushi on me, okay? Naruto said soothingly, caressing her hand, while squeezing lightly. Yugito smiled at the whiskered blonde. You know, sometimes I forget who's the oldest. She returned his soft, reassuring squeeze. Naruto chuckled at something Kurama told him and started running south. Yugito stared at Naruto's retreating back, when her own demon said something herself. She palmed her face before growling and chasing after the other blonde. 30 minutes passed before the blonde duo arrived at their designated location. Yugi-chan, I have good news and bad news. Yugito groaned. Let me guess the bad news, she said, picking up a shirt from the floor of the abandoned warehouse they were in. He removed the tracker you put on him, she said, tossing said shirt. And he's probably halfway to the border by now. Naruto pouted. Well, yes, that's partially true. But you forget the good news, he said, to which she gave him a glare to hurry up. Which is, he's still here, the blonde added, twirling his finger around in the air, signaling that the man was still within 15 yards of their position. Chakra seemed to flare up around them, to show the young blonde was right. If it isn't the cute little blonde from the candy shop. I knew you were trained. Tell me, young one, how'd you know I was still here? The man's voice sounded throughout the entire area. I know what you smell like, Naruto said, tapping his nose. I want to know what you smell like, you and your sweet little friend right there. The voice sounded softly. Both the blondes shuddered. Plus, Naruto yelled, the last team that found you, turned up dead by a final confrontation. They were very aware, there was no chance they would be ambushed, even on their worst days. It seems you have enough warrior's pride, to face them head on, Naruto said, cracking his bandaged knuckles. Sadly, the last team just weren't strong enough to handle you. That's why our leader sent us. Yugito chimed in. Are you sure, you two are enough? The voice questioned with sharp doubt. Naruto smirked. Believe it or not, I am smarter than all in my age group, and even some adults. The tracker I placed on you was far more special than you gave it credit for. It's in your skin now, man, there's no point for you to hide, Naruto said, nodding at Yugito. She smirked and disappeared. A yell sounded seconds after, and Raiden's body skidded into view before he flipped back onto his feet. His torso was uncovered, showing his muscles, a large bruise smack dab in the center. We'll also be releasing this young girl so she can return home, Yugito said from the second floor, overlooking the others, a young girl beside her. The girl was slightly younger than the Kyuubi container, maybe by a year. She was chocolate-skinned with shiny silver hair. A stunning contrast, really. She was going to be a real head-turner when she grows up. Currently, strong rope bound her hands and feet together and duct tape was over her mouth. That was until Yugito removed it, using chakra to numb the pain. Raiden growled. The sight of his recent catch in Yugito's arms enraged him. You bitch. Time slowed down after those two words exited his mouth. No sooner did the shine of something metallic enter his peripherals. Yugito is no bitch, a voice said before time quickened and his head was removed. Naruto was a few feet behind the headless body, his scythe held in a reverse grip. He growled as he swung the blood from his scythe, before it was resealed. He took a deep breath before he turned around, his amber eyes turning back to blue. Mission accomplished, Yugi-chan, Naruto said with a grin. Yugito stood shocked. In the past the blonde had never acted that protective of her. Even though she was fully capable of taking care of herself, and would have killed the man herself. But Naruto just revealed that he was clearly faster than her. She shook her head and returned her partner's grin. You're right, Naruto-kun. Clean everything up and meet me on the south edge of the village, she said, jumping down from her perch, the girl holding onto her tightly. I'm taking this one home, she added, patting the child's head. Thank you for saving me, the young girl said to Yugito. She wiggled herself from Yugito's arms and ran to give Naruto a hug, and thanking him as well. Naruto smiled at the girl. Oh, it was nothing, he said, rubbing the back of his head, watching her run back to Yugito. Yugito shook her head. Anyway, let's get you home, she said, escorting the little girl from the warehouse. Naruto shrugged and walked up to the dismembered head and sealed it in a scroll. After he finished, he concentrated. He felt chakra surround the air in front of him, and his hand, before he snapped his fingers. A spark appeared above his fingers and the body burst into bright blue flames, causing him to smugly smirk. You've gotten really arrogant after learning how to control fire, Kurama said from the depths of Naruto's mind. I guess this is the part where you tell me, I still have much to learn, so I should stow my arrogance to the back of my mind. Naruto thought with a groan. I was also going to tell you, I'm proud of how skilled you are with it, you know, for a human. So why don't we just go with both? Kurama said with a yawn. Naruto scoffed. Tell me something I don't know. He thought, walking out of the large double doors. Well, I think I'm developing a rash on me. Alright, I don't need to know where. The blonde mentally yelled, cutting their mental connection. Naruto growled, still able to hear Kurama's deep laughter. He shook his head and took to the rooftops, heading south. It only took him a matter of minutes to reach his destination, where he proceeded to change into his professional attire. Luckily, as he was unsealed his mask, Yugito joined him. She too was in her hunter attire. No words were exchanged between them, before they set off towards Kumogakure, towards home. 2 days later, Naruto scratched his head as he contemplated what could be the most difficult decision in his life. His options were: A. Eat breakfast before meeting a sensei for training and risk throwing it back up. Or B. Don't eat and train with an empty stomach. Ki. Naruto skidded back, clutching at his stomach, his breakfast on the verge of traveling back up his throat. Through sheer force of will, he resisted the urge and glared at his physical sensei underneath his blonde bangs. Keep it down, I didn't even hit you that hard. The Raikage said coldly. He stood there, his large muscles bulging with every breath. Also, even though they've already been training for 3 hours, not a drop of sweat adorned his body. Naruto, on the other hand, was covered in sweat, grime and blood. He too was shirtless, and you could see multiple bruises and cuts adorning his chiseled body. Though they were quickly receding from sight. The blonde was proud to show off his body whenever he got the chance. Naruto looked absolutely cut. His muscles were very noticeable, but not to the point of being grotesque in appearance. Even under his bandages, you could see the muscles underneath. Thus was the result of his brutal, mostly physical, training. The finally stood to his feet and his glare darkened. His eyes had been amber the entire time. Always instructed him to always fight to kill, and Naruto never disappointed him in trying. Naruto spit out a blob of blood and dropped back into his stance. Over the past year of Naruto's strictly taijutsu training from A, he's learned a few different fighting styles. Though he only progressed further in his 2 favorite styles of fighting. His most favorite was boxing, with his secondary being kickboxing. I tried to have him incorporate some grapples in there, but it didn't seem to stick. The blonde begun lightly bouncing to signify that he was ready for the next round. Good. That's exactly what I want to see. Now show me why I chose you as my only apprentice. A yelled as lightning arced around wildly. Aghh. Naruto joined in the yelling, reddish chakra whipping around his body. He immediately dashed and threw 12 strikes at impressive speeds. I stood unfazed as he allowed the strikes to land. He caught the last 2 and squeezed hard. Naruto grunted and jumped a little in the air and began pummeling A's hard abs with multiple stomps. Again, I was unfazed to Naruto's assault. In a stunning display of acrobats, I did a back flip, his grip on Naruto still strong. Naruto was slammed on the ground as I finally let go of him. But it wasn't finished, and he scooped Naruto's body with his foot and kicked him a few feet in the air. It happened so fast that Naruto didn't have time to be surprised. I stomped his back foot and motioned for the beginning of a double-fisted strike. Naruto's amber eyes saw this and his body flew into motion. He was able to slap, more like springboard, himself over the attack. He then proceeded to twist in the air until he was able to axe kick the Raikage on top of his head. The force of the attack caused a small crater beneath them. A smirked and Naruto's foot was instantly grabbed. The man then proceeded to spin quickly, before throwing Naruto across the training ground for the 7th time since the start of their training session. The whiskered genin was going far too fast to right himself in the air, and because of his inability, he smashed into the side of a mountain. I relaxed and crossed his arms. You'll never get to uphold your end of the bargain, if you end up dead because of this training. Naruto heard from beneath a pile of rubble. You know, he's right. It'll be a real disappointment if you don't complete the dia. Foxes are big on deal-making situations. Kurama said with a sigh. Well, surprise, I'm not a fox. Naruto said annoyed. No, but you are the container of one. So if you don't complete the deal as agreed upon, I'll have to eat you and everyone you love, the kitsune said with the utmost casual tone. Naruto groaned as he pulled himself from the wreckage. Fine, Lord Pain in the, Naruto thought, before he emerged from the wreckage. I'll just have to try harder. He said, his will to fight returning stronger than ever. A's face split into a large grin. Now you're ready. He said, uncrossing his arms before he surprisingly went on the offensive. Naruto relied on pure instinct to dodge his sensei's attacks. The blonde was only able to evade 3 out of every 5. You're getting better, keep it up. A said just before upping the acceleration, cutting Naruto's success in half. Naruto was growing frustrated and called upon Kurama's chakra. The crimson chakra bubbled from Naruto's body and he swiped at A, forcing him to jump back. Naruto simply stood there, allowing the chakra to heal his body, before he withdrew it back into the gate. Naruto heaved and spit out another blob of blood. He stayed in his initial stage, yet his eyes were focused in an amber color. The slit in his pupil remained as Naruto cracked his knuckles. He prepared to fight again when A held up a hand, halting his preparation. That's enough for now. I'm satisfied with how you've grown this past year. I believe you're ready for the mission we talked about last year. A said with a large, proud smile. Naruto closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. He opened his eyes, cerulean replacing amber. Thank you, sir. I've been waiting for this moment since you spoke it. Naruto said with a straight face, though his shaking, clenched fist showed the excitement he was feeling. Good. You have until sunset to prepare. Good luck on your quest. A said watching as Naruto bowed, before he walked away. A looked down at his chest, as 3 thin red lines appeared. Yup. I don't have to worry about anything happening to him during this mission. He'll be alright. A said softly before he walked back to his office. Naruto walked back to his apartment with a straight face. Isn't that a coincidence? Naruto thought while walking to his white-clothed forehead protector, his destroyed shirt, and his weapon pouch. He fished out a soldier pill and downed it immediately. His stamina returned and the remaining pain in his body dulled down a lot. Sunset. Remember your training, Naruto. This is the most important mission you're about to embark on. Kurama said as Naruto left the village of Kumo. The moon was slowly making its way towards its peak upon the night sky. Naruto stood with a determined face, hidden behind a pitch-black ninja mask, only his eyes were visible. His attire consisted of a standard ninja black bodysuit, the bandages under his long sleeves were black in color. Even the tape wrapped around his feet were black. This mission required the utmost amount of stealth. Naruto looked back to see Yugito and Darui standing at the gates, the others were still on their own mission with Killer Bee. Be careful, Naruto-kun. I would be sad if you failed, she said, glancing at the ground. Naruto rose an eyebrow, not used to her acting shy. Okay, I will, Naruto said, giving her a thumbs up. Don't worry, Naruto, I'll protect her while you're gone, Darui said as his hand landed right atop Yugito's head. Naruto's concealed grin widened, as the other hand joined, also giving Darui a thumbs up. He gave them a wave before he set off into the sunless night. Hurry back, Naruto-kun. Hurry back to me, she whispered, watching as he got further and further away from them. Alright, enough of this mushy stuff. Your boyfriend is going to be fine, now let's go, you got more training to do. He spoke, as her and Naruto's official Jonin-sensei. 18 hours later, Naruto arrived at a very small clearing sometime around 1 in the afternoon. He was pretty tired and was sore from his long, very long, run. He was safely inside of Hi-no-Kuni, about a mile or 2 inside. He had to use a lot of chakra to get there, that fast. It was mostly to keep himself moving while passing by the freezing land of Frost Country. He was tempted to rest in the Hot Springs Country, but he didn't want to stop. Alright, it's really important that we finish this assignment as swiftly as possible. The longer you're in the country, the more probable it is that you'll garner some notice somehow. Kurama explained to the alert blonde. Yes, sensei, but it's also important that I think things through, to prevent any mistakes in this mission. Failure is not an option. Naruto thought, looking around the area. The trees seemed to be regaining their lost color thanks to the fall season reaching its end. Failure never crossed my mind. Kurama said as Naruto closed his eyes and felt the chilled breeze past his eyelids. You have the seal ready? Kurama questioned after a few minutes passed. Naruto held his left hand up in front of his eyes. The seal in question was to unblock his currently blocked chakra. It's been blocked for the past hour or so. Completely blocking his chakra was the only option he had to sneak into the village. Otherwise the barrier would easily detect his signature. While he was gone from the village, he's been studying the barrier, making sure he stayed just outside of it. Never venturing past it, or else they would immediately know his location. He opened his eyes and threw a kunai to his right. The loud squeal told him that he successfully killed his lunch. Awesome. Naruto muttered, walking towards the dead boar. The kunai pierced right into its skull, only the ring being visible. He whistled at the sight. Didn't think I threw it that hard, awesome. Naruto muttered again, putting a finger through the ring and yanking the kunai out. Blood sprayed a bit and Naruto jumped back in surprise. Whoa, this is going to be a big lunch. Naruto said, smiling behind his mask. He. It took him an hour, but he finally finished skinning and roasting the boar. It was a big creature and it definitely filled him up. He stood with a stretch and widened his senses, to the best of his chakraless abilities. He nodded to himself, when he could only sense wild animals, attracted to the smell of the boar. He purposefully didn't eat the entire thing, to leave the leftovers for the wild animals. It was mostly other boars, some coyotes and like 2 foxes. He smirked and let out a loud whistle. 2 minutes later, the 2 foxes came scampering into the clearing. The 2 kitsunes had reddish-orange coats with white tips on their tails. Though they were different if you paid attention to detail. One was more reddish in color while the other was more orangish. The Blodna could tell they were quite young as well, judging by their small sizes. He smiled at the little foxes and nodded towards the boar. Eat to your heart's content, he said. The foxes looked at him and tilted their heads. The blonde rolled his eyes before closing them. It was a little hard, but when he opened them, their color had changed from blue to red. He gave a toothy grin before nodding again. When the vulpine saw his eyes, they immediately knew what he represented. They yapped and scampered towards the cooked boar, before biting into it vigorously. They had a lot to eat as the blonde only ate the limbs of the animal, leaving the bulk of the body for them. Naruto's eyes reverted back and he leaned against the tree. The moon during the previous night provided very little light, and there was a chance that, tonight, it would be the same, if slightly worse for his case. He has always paid attention to the moon's many different forms, so he knew that within maybe a week, the moon will be full. He didn't have time to wait until after it started to get darker each night. He had to do it, while it was already dark. He didn't want to have to adapt his plan because of contingencies he could have prevented. He took a deep breath and opened his eyes, having found they closed. He turned his gaze to the fire. Concentrate. Feel the element and control the element. Naruto continued to think. Everything around him gave off nature chakra. Not having chakra available made it easier for him to sense the nature chakra. It was a good thing that he wasn't taking it inside of his body, because that would spell instant disaster. The nearby fire shot up a bit and Naruto smiled, as control over the flames transferred to him. He extended his hand and quickly pulled it back. The flames shot towards him and he caught it. He watched it hover above his hands, still flickering and waving, feeling very much alive. He smiled, thankful that he wasn't completely defenseless, thanks to his unexplainable skill with natural chakra. He shot the flames straight up, towards the sky, and watched as they vanished. He released a sigh of relief that he really was getting better. What he did was super complex and simple at the same time. In a sense, it was fire-bending. But how, was the complex part. He spent a total of 6 months meditating before he was even able to focus on the nature chakra that was radiating from the sun above. And it took him only 2 months to learn how to use it to make fire of his own. His first successful attempt surprised him to the point that he was injured, but that was a year ago. He loved that he was always able to create such intense blue flames. Now, a year into his experience, he could tell himself that it should not have taken so long for something that was so simple. You know, considering he had a demon as a sensei. It was then that a thought came to his mind. There's a big chance that that garnered some sort of attention, he thought before waving at the duo of foxes. Sayonara, little Vulpine, Naruto said before he fixed his mask and left the air. Hopefully, by the time the scouts arrive at the area, the little foxes are gone. Naruto muttered, before yapping sounded behind him. He turned his head, before the 2 foxes jumped onto each of his shoulders, wrapping their tails around his neck. Okay, scratch that, you guys could come with. But you'll have to be very quiet, this is very important, he said before he started moving at Chunin speeds, despite his handicap. The results of hard training. He had a long way to go before he even gets to the barrier. Then another hour or so before he gets to the village. And that is when the real mission starts. Naruto mentally cursed as he watched Konoha's walls from afar. He spotted at least 12 Jonin, judging from their vests, on the walls. He knew from how they were spaced apart, that, where one peripheral ended, another started. That made things difficult, if he wanted to slip by them undetected. It was the same setting for the other 3 sides of the village, the main gate having a dozen more. I don't remember the village being this heavily guarded. Naruto thought before hearing the whimpers of the little Vulpines on each of his shoulders. Sorry little guys, but it's too dangerous for you 2 to go in there. This is where we part ways. Why don't you return to your parents? They're probably worrying sick about you too. Naruto murmured as the 2 foxes hopped off his shoulders and scampered behind some foliage. The blonde returned his eyes back to the village with a grimace. I don't think you're going to complete this mission tonight. You actually might have to wait a week or 2 before the moon could work in your favor. Kurama commented with a yawn. You definitely need sleep, furball, if being awake has you thinking like that. I'm already without chakra, they couldn't detect me, even if they were looking out for me. Naruto replied with hardening eyes. Though Naruto said that, he couldn't disagree with the fox's words. It seemed like the hardest part was getting to the walls. A total of 25 yards separated the walls from the tree line. He looked to his right, hearing the bumping of wheels on the ground. A traveling merchant, at this time of night. Naruto just had to see. He moved further into the forest and climbed the tallest tree near the road. He squinted his eyes and saw a group of Jonins talking to the merchant. They were searching rather aggressively, all around the man's wagon. Damn, they're really checking him. Naruto thought, returning his gaze to the walls ahead. He was located at the north entrance, his future escape route. But, what he needed to do, was enter from the west. The red light district was closer to that entrance. Of course it was also for the off chance that he was seen. Those people really didn't give a damn about anything, so they wouldn't rat him out, if they did see him. Naruto scowled. It was always harder to break in somewhere, than it was to break out. It was then that an idea came to mind. He mulled it over in consideration, weighing the pros and cons of such an action. It seems like an only option at this point. Kurama informed with a large grin. Naruto shrugged his shoulders at the words. Then let this tree become a beacon for my cause. Naruto said with a smirk as he dug into his bodysuit and removed his black ninja pouch. This better work. Key. Naruto crouched on the west side of the village, waiting for his cue. He should have about 10 more minutes before the fireworks started. Again, he hoped it worked, or else he would be seen as soon as he dashed into the large gap. Again, he climbed onto the tallest peak he could and looked at the jonins on the wall. He noticed that only 10 jonin were visible. He rose an eyebrow at the oddity. Where's the other 2? He thought, narrowing his eyes. I don't know what I saw. All I know is that it was around here. The blonde heard a gruff voice, right below him, ground level. He looked down and melded into the shadows. Maybe it was just a deer or something. The Nara clan's deer ranch is only 200 yards away. Another voice, feminine by the sounds of it, assured the man. I guess it is possible one of them got out. Though I doubt it, that ranch is rather fortified. But I guess I'll disregard my gut feeling in this matter. The man said again, still a little uncertain. Good. Then perhaps we can return to our posts, the female said before a large explosion sounded to the north. Them and everyone else in the village were immediately drawn to the conflagration as more explosions sounded in that direction. The explosions were moving around the village, going counterclockwise, though they were still generally in the north. Naruto smirked as the 2 jonin below him and the others began running in that direction. Though he noticed that 6 still remained, but had their eyes away from his direction. He dug into his bodysuit again, and removed 6 kunai. He used the resonating sounds of the explosions to mask the sounds of the thudding kunai. He ran straight for the wall and used the kunai as his footholds as he jumped from each kunai, until he reached the top. When that happened, he simply hung over the edge. He didn't pull himself up, since they might see him. He kept his breathing low as he shimmied over to the gate on his right. Nobody was directly over the arcing gate, and that was his ticket inside. He heard their yells about what was happening, and how it was happening. It was music to his ears, when it became fewer in number. More shinobi were going towards the fires, failing from keeping them from spreading. The north was no longer his future escape route out of the village. When only 2 jonin remained, on either side of the gate, he silently hefted himself up and threw kunai at both of them. It was pure luck that their danger senses didn't go off, before the kunai pierced both of their jugulars and going further into their necks. Naruto gave each of their dying faces a smirk before jumping towards the nearest building, where he disappeared into the shadows. It was then that he thought about why he didn't encounter any Anbu agents. Well, other than the ones he narrowly evaded detection from outside of the walls. He shrugged his shoulders and dropped into the alley below, immersing himself in the shadows. Just then the explosion stopped and he smirked as they stopped in front of the main gate, in the east. Even from his spot in the shadows, he could see the fire in the air, just outside of the village. It took you a good hour make all of those bombs. Now that you're inside, you need to be on guard, because they will be even more on the lookout. Kurama spoke with a yawn. Naruto didn't reply, already knowing this. It was the biggest con in the plan, but also one he couldn't avoid at all. Let's just make this quick. Naruto thought as he dashed through the alleys, remembering the route from long ago. Hokage's office. Hiruzen, the old sandame, had been in the middle of paperwork when the fireworks went off. Of course this was surprising to him, since they had never been attacked this suddenly since the Kyuubi attack. The explosive vibrations shook his office as he called Anbu into sight. What the hell is happening? He questioned, standing to his feet. Explosions, just outside of the village. We don't know what caused them, but no enemies are visible outside of said walls. We really